the live on Facebook because this is what I wanted to test. It won't let me share the screen after I've already gone live. And that's my plan today, is share the screen. So let me make sure that that's the case. And then I'll probably, it looks like, need to restart it. Okay, I'm going to do that. I'll be right back on Facebook, but I'm still on StreamYard. So hang on one sec. Get right back there. Hang on. I have an exciting talk, and that is why I'm restarting this live so that I can share my screen, because today we are getting all into food sensitivities. And I'm going to actually pull up and walk you through my food sensitivity results from several years ago. So wait for it. We're going to talk about how food sensitivities form, how they're different from food allergies. We'll talk about how they affect our mental health and physical health for that matter, and like the mechanism behind it. It's really, really good. So if you suspect that you have food sensitivities, you will definitely want to watch this. And how would you know? If maybe you notice bloating, fatigue after eating, skin issues like eczema or psoriasis, perhaps you suddenly become anxious, or you suddenly become depressed, or headaches. I mean, you name it. So, okay, here we go. I think I've got it fixed. Let's see here. Okay. All right. I think we should be good to go. Let me just make sure. Yeah, there we go. It's pulled up on Facebook. All right, wonderful. And then let me do a little switcheroo here on StreamYard, and we'll do the exact same thing. Okay, cool. All right, I see it on StreamYard. I see it on Facebook. Beautiful. Hello, everyone. Kim Z here. I'm an integrative nutritionist. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an integrative nutritionist in my online nutrition and wellness practice called Progressive Health and Wellness, where I work with ambitious men and women who are struggling with their mental health or performance by taking a root-caused body-mind approach to optimize mental and physical health. So food sensitivities, I talk a lot about food sensitivities, and that's what we're deep diving into today. So we'll talk about, as I was just saying, as I was getting all the tech figured out, today I'm going to talk about how food sensitivities might be affecting your anxiety, your depression, your focus, brain fogginess, ADD type symptoms, but then also maybe physical health symptoms like bloating and reflux and IBS and water retention, difficulty losing weight, brain fog, skin conditions, joint pain, you name it. And I'll also explain why those symptoms are so vast, so that by the end of your time today in this live, you'll understand how food sensitivities actually affect our health and some signs that you might be having it. And then most importantly, the best testing options available, because not all tests are created equal. So for those of you hopping on, hello, so good to see you. Thanks for joining. If you could let me know, drop a comment, let me know that you're here. If you're watching the replay, same thing. I love connecting with all of you and want to be of as much service and value as possible. So let me know that you're here. And then also, if any questions come up, if you're watching live or the replay, just tag me in it. And I always get notified and I'll come back and answer it. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of fundamental things first. We'll talk about what a food sensitivity is, how it's different from an allergy. We'll talk about how they form, and then we'll go through these test results. Actually, then we'll talk about how they affect the brain, which is then how it affects our mood. and our mental health. And then we'll go through these test results. Okay, so food sensitivities are different from allergies. Here's how. Allergies are mediated by a very specific branch, if you will, of the immune system. So allergies involve what's called immunoglobulin E or IgE antibodies. And basically simplifying the whole process, but basically when those IgE antibodies bind to an antigen, let's say pollen or peanut, then that also, so antibody binds to antigen, binds to mast cell. And it's that process that then causes the mast cell to degranulate and then release histamine and other chemokines, proteases, things that activate the immune system. That process can take, like 20 minutes. It's virtually immediate. So that's an allergy, and it happens every single time. And like I said, it's immediate. The symptoms can also be vast, everything from diarrhea and congestion and sinusitis and coughing to, nausea, vomiting, and of course, anaphylaxis, hives. Food sensitivity, on the other hand, is different. This is called a delayed or type 4. So allergy is type 1, immediate onset. Food sensitivity is delayed or type 4. And it involves different immunoglobulins, could involve IgG immunoglobulins, to some degree IgA, IgM. And then it can also be antibody independent, where it just stimulates the innate immune response and stimulates the release of cytokines that doesn't involve a memory cell. So, or the antibodies. So in that case, things to keep an eye on or be aware of, I should say, is because it's delayed, it can take up to 2 days for these symptoms to show up. So that means if you're sensitive to almonds and you eat an almond on Monday, you might feel bloated and anxious and tired on Wednesday, which makes it a lot harder to identify. The other thing is these will not be picked up on an allergy test. So if you get like a traditional allergy test, especially a skin prick test or even an IgE blood test, these may or may not show up. They would only show up if there's also an allergy. So almonds, for example, you can have both. You can have an allergy and a sensitivity. You've got IgE and, let's say, IgG antibodies both responding to it. So you can have both, but if there's not an allergy response, it's not going to show up on food allergy testing. So those are some of the key things to keep in mind and the difference. Now, how do food sensitivities form? Food sensitivities are the result of a compromised intestinal barrier, microbiome, and immune system. So what that means is the intestinal lining is supposed to be like a fortress. It's basically one long skin tube that runs from one end all the way down to the other. It's the closest that the outside world comes in contact with our inside world. So because of that, we have about 70 to 80% of our immune system lining the intestines in the form of Peyer's patches and gut-associated lymphoid tissue and other types of immune cells or tissue. And we also have, as part of the immune system, the physical barrier that is the intestinal lining. And that physical barrier is designed to keep everything in the lumen of the intestine, the inside of the intestines, unless it is selectively absorbed. However, through a multitude of factors, like antibiotics or stress or poor diet, certain medications like antacids, there's a number of things that can cause the intestinal lining to become more hyperpermeable or leaky. And when that happens, now undigested or poorly digested food proteins, the immune system always goes after proteins. Food proteins inappropriately leak through into the rest of the blood and body, where the immune system sees it. It's not normally supposed to see foods like that, proteins like that. So it sees it and starts to attack it. And then that memory is formed, and that is how food sensitivities manifest, right? So the immune system sees gluten, for example, says that is not supposed to be here, attacks the gluten. And then every time it sees gluten, it remembers that, it remembers it and starts to attack it again. Okay, now, so that is where I get into, or what I mean by food sensitivities are the result of a compromised intestinal barrier, microbiome, and immune system. With that said, couple other things to keep in mind. One, I'm going to piggyback on that statement. So the immune system sees these foods and starts to attack these foods, right? Well, this creates, so now if antibodies start to bind to this food, this creates what's called a circulating immune complex. I think of it like ants to a piece of sugar. So you've got this circulating immune complex, and this now the food antibody complex, and that can circulate in the blood and get lodged in different tissue. Well, this is just these antibodies just tag the food, which invites another branch of the immune system to come in and destroy that food with chemicals, cytokines. That's what those are called, and chemokines. So the immune system comes in and destroys that with chemicals, and innocent tissue can get caught in the crossfire. This is important because not only does that innocent tissue then become inflamed, and that is why, part of why symptoms can manifest in so many different areas from joints to the brain, but also from there, we can then have, like, the immune system sees that damaged tissue and then starts to go after that damaged tissue. So it can become this cascading effect, in other words. And that is also, for example, how molecular mimicry works. So let's take Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which we know is similar to celiac disease in the sense that gluten aggravates Hashimoto's through molecular mimicry. Now, in the case of celiac, that is the only autoimmune condition where we know the trigger, and that is gluten. In the case of other autoimmune conditions, gluten is a trigger, not the trigger, if that makes sense. So there can be other things that allow that autoimmune condition to manifest, but gluten aggravates it, which is a little bit different than celiac. So that's the case in Hashimoto's, and this is where molecular mimicry comes in. Basically, the immune system sees gluten and it also sees thyroid protein, and they look really similar, so it goes after both. When in reality, you can see I'm wearing rings on different fingers. So they're not exactly the same, but they're close enough. So it goes after both and perpetuates the autoimmune condition. So how this happens in the brain is that circulating immune complex. And even, I mentioned in the case of food sensitivities, sometimes it's mediated by the innate immune response or by mast cells or toll-like receptors or other aspects of the immune system that are not antibody driven. And the chemical response of from the immune system trying to destroy those foods those chemicals still cause symptoms. That is what causes the symptoms. And those chemicals and or the circulating immune complexes can cross into the brain. That triggers the microglia cells in the brain. That's the brain's immune tissue. Those microglia cells start releasing their own pro-inflammatory chemicals to try to destroy those foods, the food antigens. And now we've got brain inflammation. And I've talked a lot about how brain inflammation, the cytokine model of depression or anxiety, brain inflammation is very much tied to mental health issues, especially anxiety and depression. So that is essentially the mechanism. And that's not even getting into how the inflammation that's happening in the gut also translocates to the brain via the vagus nerve, via those immune chemicals, via the microbiome. And so that gut-brain connection is also very strong in how that influences brain inflammation and mood. Last point I want to make before I go through these results is well, now that I think about it, this might be better. No, okay. Last thing I want to make is once that immune memory is formed, in the case especially of antibodies and food sensitivities. And every time you eat that food, it's going to trigger inflammation, and it will trigger inflammation in the GI tract too. And so once that memory is there, it's there. And so that's where the food can start, it becomes a vicious cycle, right? The food and the reaction to the food is further degrading the intestinal lining, which then keeps it leaky, which then allows other food proteins to come in, which allows the formation of more sensitivities and the perpetuation of the existing ones. So there's actually two different camps, if you will, in the functional health world. And that is people that think you should, practitioners that feel you should test for food sensitivities and remove them at the very beginning, then go about healing the gut. And then there's the people that think you should heal the gut and then test for food sensitivities. I fall into the first camp. I think if that food if you're eating foods that you're sensitive to unknowingly and constantly triggering inflammation, it makes it really hard to really heal the gut lining and optimize the microbiome and immune system. So my stance is to test the food sensitivities up front, cut those out, then we'll do the deeper work. And this is really, really important. Cutting out the sensitive foods is only one part of the process, because we have to heal what allowed them to manifest in the first place, right? That's where we do the deeper work of, we'll look at a stool test, we'll fix the microbiome, we'll dampen that inflammation, and we'll really start to optimize the integrity of the gut lining and the gut ecosystem as a whole. So keep that in mind. These foods are not, sensitive foods are not supposed to be avoided for life, right? Just for a period of time, about 4 to 6 months, ideally while doing the deeper work, so that you can successfully reintroduce those foods and tolerate them and not have any symptoms. Okay, so let's go through this test. I ran this in 2016, and this is the same test that we run on many of our clients. Food sensitivity tests are not all created equal. IgG antibody testing is the most common type of test, but it's not the most reliable, because you can actually form antibodies as a natural means of clearing out the food. It does not mean that it's eliciting immune response or symptoms. You can also form, it's called the IgG blocking. So I think it's IgG4, I believe, that blocks the immune reaction. So it's almost like a backdoor protective mechanism, which means that the problem with IgG testing and tests like Everlywell, or a lot of other like home tests for food sensitivities, or just routine lab tests that are done, you'll get a lot of false negatives and false positives. So I've seen clients bring in test results like these to our first appointment, and some have like 0 to 3, and then some have like 15 plus food reactions. And they're not always, they're like, I eat this food fine and I don't notice anything. I don't know what I should do, right? So they're just not that reliable. This test is the mediator response test. Its sister company is called ALCAT. And both of those labs, both of those tests are by far the most reliable. What they're measuring are, I kept mentioning those chemicals, right? The cytokines, chemokines, where the immune system is trying to destroy a perceived threat. And it's those chemicals that cause our symptoms. It's those chemicals that this test measures, the white blood cell response to a food, not just antibody production. So with that said, we get really reliable results and see very meaningful change when we test and eliminate food sensitivities. Not to mention, you can react to a host of foods that would otherwise be healthy. So look at my list here, and we'll scroll through here as well. So to go through this test as if you were a client, this test is organized based on category. So chemicals refers to naturally occurring and artificial chemicals. And there's dairy, there's fruit, vegetables, and we'll see the rest of the categories on the next page. It's also organized by level of reactivity, with green being safe, benign, non-reactive foods, yellow being moderately reactive, and red being severe. It's worth saying, I've had this experience, as so have clients. Red tends to elicit a more significant immune response, yes, and like symptoms. But a lot of people will ask, some yellow lines are longer than the others. I don't see any correlation. Reactive is reactive. So, for example, for me personally, tomato, one of the lower reactions, but that tomato really bothered me when I ate it. I noticed it right away. So you don't always notice that correlation. Now, some things I want to point out, because a lot of this is intuitive to look at, right? So what I would have my clients do in this case is avoid yellow foods are advised to be avoided for at least 3 months, red foods for at least 6, while we're optimizing the gut ecosystem. And then we start a process to reintroduce them. And we'd introduce one new food like every week or so, just to be on the safe side. But we also want to look for some themes in these results. So, for example, one thing I thought was really interesting for my test is I reacted to caffeine, cocoa, coffee, tea. So, like 4 different types of stimulants, right? It's like my body hated stimulants of any kind. That was very interesting. We also see, so egg was off the charts. We also see, so it's sesame, so it's clam and scallop. So like shellfish, what's going on with shellfish? We also see 3 different types of dairy come back. Now, people often ask, how can you be reactive to yogurt, goat's milk, and cottage cheese, but not like whey or cow's milk? That's because the proteins change when dairy changes. So when you take it from cow's milk to yogurt to cheese, the protein sequences change. Now, in my practice, I'm all about getting results. So if I see this, I'm just taking the person off of dairy altogether, so that we can move as quickly as possible. Now, things to keep in mind here is a lot of these foods I was eating like with some kind of regularity, maybe weekly, maybe a few times a month, like apple, tomato, cauliflower. So there's another question, is a commonly asked question. I eat these foods all the time and I don't notice a reaction. Why is that? So this is really important. You can develop a tolerance to food sensitivities. Tolerance might not be the right word. Look at it like this. It's like alcohol. If you drink 2 glasses of wine every night, you're probably not really going to feel a buzz. But if you cut out alcohol altogether for 3 months and then have 2 glasses of wine, it'll be really obvious, right? You'll feel pretty loopy. Same concept here. These food sensitivities are keeping inflammation at a constant level. It's like our bucket is always overflowing just a little bit. And then when we avoid all of these foods for 3 months, that inflammation drops, right? Our bucket drops down. It's no longer overflowing. When we introduce prematurely, so let's say we're supposed to cut these out for 3 months, we introduce them, we eat, a food after a month. Then the symptoms, the immune system launches what's called a hyper-exaggerated immune response. It's very similar to how booster shots work with vaccines, right? You get a booster shot to reignite the immune response. Keep it elevated. Keep that memory strong. Same concept here. So hyper-exaggerated immune response, and the symptoms will be much more obvious, especially without doing work to heal the gut ecosystem. So let's see, other commonly asked questions. Do I have to avoid all of these foods at once, or can you avoid some here, some there? Ideally all at once, because again, going back to that bucket analogy, we're trying to drain the bucket, that inflammatory bucket, as quickly as possible. And doing that with, some foods here, some foods there, is like draining it one drop at a time. Next, Can you just reduce the foods and not avoid them completely? No. The immune system responds to minute amounts of a food. So by eating, just a little nibble of bread or a little sip of milk here and there, it's like constantly reminding it to go after that food. It's keeping the food present in the immune memory, and it won't let that memory fully dissipate, which is what we're trying to do. So I tell my clients, do the best you can, avoid these foods as much as possible. At the same time, life is going to happen. You're going to go to a restaurant, you're going to go to a friend's house, you'll have accidental exposures to these foods. That's fine. Don't worry about that. We can't live in a bubble, but eating these foods with any kind of regularity would slow progress very much. So do the best you can, in other words. And then I answered this before, but do these foods need to be avoided for life? And the answer is no. 3 to 6 months or I typically have my clients start reintroducing when they emotionally feel ready. Intuitively, it feels right. But most importantly, we've met their health goals and we've got a strong baseline from which we can, a foundation from which we can reintroduce. All right, everyone. Now, I will talk more in a different talk about how, how to optimize the gut lining and where these fit into the picture. But this is a phenomenal starting place in really helping us. This food sensitivity testing defines one man's food being another man's poison. As you can see, lots of really healthy foods here for other people, but not for me in this case. And it also is so integral in helping us create a truly personalized therapeutic diet. So with that said, if anybody, we are taking $100 off this food sensitivity test for the next week, all of this week through Sunday, when you sign up for an initial 90-minute or deep dive first consultation or the Chaos to Calm 90-day coaching program, because we will review these results in that first appointment and in your first appointment for Chaos to Calm and get you started on a personalized nutrition plan right out of the gates. So $100 off, that's really significant. Drop a comment, shoot me a message if you want to take me up on the offer, and we'll talk about how to get that arranged, hop on the phone, talk more about what you're looking for and make sure everything feels good. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.